Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. The first time the Exari observed Earth, they chuckled. Through their immense telescopes, they saw a world still struggling to stabilize. The planet's surface was scarred, its weather unpredictable, its atmosphere barely holding on. No trace of advanced technology, no warp signatures in orbit, no evidence of anything more than primitive civilizations scattered across the continents. Earth appeared to be just another young world, a blip in the vastness of the galaxy, not even worth the effort to document. To the Exari, it was a curiosity at best, no more than a newborn planet fumbling its way through the universe. They marked it as primitive, no different from countless other young planets they had encountered, and moved on with their expansion. They didn't see a species struggling to grow. They didn't see the latent potential of humanity. What they couldn't have known, what they couldn't have imagined, was that beneath Earth's surface, buried deep beneath the Rockies, humanity had been quietly preparing. For decades, the planet's finest minds and most dedicated hands had been working in secret, building something no one outside those sacred walls knew about, something that would change the galaxy forever. In the heart of the mountains, hidden within a cavern so massive it could have housed 100 cities, humanity's first true warship was taking form. Not just a satellite or an observation station, but something far more dangerous, a living, breathing weapon built for war. This was the Leviathan, a colossal ship designed not just for space travel, but for survival, for defiance, for ensuring that Earth's name would never be erased from the stars. The Leviathan was humanity's last hope, a weapon of unimaginable power, ready to rise from its secret lair to defend a world that had yet to fully comprehend its own potential. Only a handful knew about Project Dawnfire. It was a myth whispered in the darkest corners of governments, a rumor muttered by paranoid conspiracy theorists who feared the truth might leak. The public was unaware, and the military remained focused on conventional threats, blissfully ignorant of the true threat in the sky above them. If anyone outside this hidden project knew the truth, the consequences would be disastrous. If the Exari learned that humanity had been preparing for war long before their arrival, Earth would be eradicated in an instant. Then, the Exari came. Their massive mothership arrived without warning, appearing in the sky like a silent god, casting a shadow across the world. It was so vast, so overpowering, that the ground seemed to tremble beneath it. Its surface shimmered with an eerie, rainbow-like glow, an unnatural aura that marked its arrival as something not just alien, but ancient. People looked up in awe, expecting a message of peace, a call to cooperation, perhaps the beginning of a new era. But there was nothing peaceful in the message they received. The voice from above was cold, mechanical, inhuman. This world is young, its inhabitants primitive. Prepare for relocation and uplift. The word uplift sounded almost kind, but it was nothing more than a disguise for destruction. The Exari were not here to bring knowledge or friendship. They intended to strip Earth of its resources, enslave or genetically alter its people, and remake the planet to suit their needs. It was not an invitation, it was an ultimatum. Surrender or be wiped out. Humanity's response was immediate, but hopeless. Nations scrambled to take action. Governments scattered to their bunkers. Military forces mobilized. They launched missiles, scrambled jets, broadcasted desperate calls for peace. But the Exari made no response. Instead, they began their attack. Small, sleek craft dropped from the mothership, descending like dark shadows, striking power plants, communications, anything that connected the world together. Cities burned, and society fractured. Within a matter of days, the Exari predicted that Earth would collapse into chaos. In a month, humanity would be nothing more than a footnote in the Exari's vast empire. But the Exari had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated Earth. They thought it was just another young world, untested and weak. They didn't know about the Leviathan. Deep beneath the surface, alarms began to blare. Humanity's secret weapon was awakening. The engineers, soldiers, and pilots who had spent their lives preparing for this moment rushed to their stations. The Leviathan, a ship that was not supposed to launch for another year, powered up. Fuel lines detached with a hiss, the ship's systems blinked green on the monitors, and the massive war machine slowly began to rise from its hidden grave. It was a beast of metal and might, designed not just to explore the stars, but to strike back, to ensure that Earth would not go quietly into the dark. As the Exari burned through cities above, the Earth trembled and cracked. The Leviathan, wrapped in black armor, rose into the sky with a roar that shook the very atmosphere. The Exari had no idea what was coming. They thought Earth was weak. They were about to discover that humanity's strength had been lying dormant, waiting for this moment. The Leviathan surged upwards, tearing through the sky with a force that defied belief. Its engines roared, and its massive frame sliced through the atmosphere like a living thing. Every inch of the ship seemed to hum with power, every part of its hull vibrating with a deep, primal energy. Above the Earth, the Exari mothership loomed like a god, an oppressive shadow over the cities below. It was so vast, it almost felt like it had always been there, a natural part of the sky, as though the Earth had never been meant to exist without it. But the Leviathan was not a god. It was something much more dangerous. It was human. The first shots had already been fired. The Exari had begun their assault on the ground, cities burning, entire nations falling to their relentless wave of destruction. Humanity had been caught off guard, unprepared for the sheer force of the Exari's power. But the Leviathan was not a part of Earth's unpreparedness. It was the answer to everything the Exari had underestimated. It was humanity's greatest weapon, built not only to withstand the unimaginable, but to return fire with a vengeance. As the Leviathan climbed higher into the sky, breaking through the cloud layer, the crew aboard the ship braced themselves for what was to come. Captain Elena Vance stood on the command bridge, her eyes fixed ahead, staring at the growing form of the Exari mothership. She had known this day would come. She had known Earth would face a threat like no other, and that they would be the ones to rise and meet it. She had trained for this, commanded her people for this. And now it was time to see if humanity's resolve would be enough. Her fingers gripped the steel arms of the command chair, and she inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the situation press on her chest. Every decision she made in the next few moments could mean the difference between victory and extinction. Around her, the bridge was alive with activity. Officers barked commands, engineers called out readings, and the crew worked as one, their eyes locked on their duties, their minds focused entirely on the task ahead. "Status," Elena commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. She didn't flinch, didn't allow herself to hesitate. This was what she had been prepared for. This was what Earth had spent years building, fighting, and hoping for. "Shields are holding at 70%, Commander Ruiz reported, his voice tight with tension. "The reactor is stable, but we're pushing its limits. The main weapons systems are online, but we've got no targeting data on the Exari tech. It's all guesswork." "Guesswork is better than nothing," Elena replied, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the holographic projection of the Exari mothership in front of her. The enemy ship loomed large, a seemingly invincible fortress hanging in the sky. It had been designed for centuries of battle, While the Leviathan had been rushed into service, its systems untested, its crew unprepared for the full weight of what they were about to face. But Elena knew one thing that the Exari didn't. Humanity was a force unlike any other. It had survived wars, plagues, and the harshest trials the Earth had to offer. And when pushed to the edge, humanity would fight back. "Bring us above the clouds," Elena ordered, her voice cold and commanding. "I want that mothership in my sights." The Leviathan's engines roared as it surged forward, breaking through the thick layer of clouds with terrifying speed. For a moment, everything below seemed to fall away, as though the ship had entered another world. The world of the Exari. The moment the ship broke through the cloud cover, the full scale of the enemy mothership became apparent. It was a thing of immense proportions, a floating fortress with weaponry unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Its surface shimmered with iridescent colors, casting an eerie glow across the sky. The Exari fighters, tiny compared to their mothership, began to peel off in response to the Leviathan's arrival. Hundreds of them, sleek and fast, darted through the sky like deadly arrows, each one armed with weapons capable of tearing the Leviathan apart in moments. Elena watched as the first wave of enemies charged toward them, their movements fluid and calculated. "Engagement in 10 seconds!" Ruiz shouted, his face pale as he tracked the incoming fighters on his display. Elena's mind raced. "Deploy the Hornets!" Across the Leviathan's hull, a series of compartments hissed open, releasing dozens of miniature drones, each one armed with enough firepower to level a city block. The drones, agile and fast, swarmed toward the Exari fighters, slashing through the air with a ferocity that left no room for hesitation. The first Exari fighter came into range, its sleek form cutting through the sky with impossible speed. The drones met it head-on. A blast of green fire erupted from the fighter as it attempted to retaliate, but the drone's agility and firepower proved too much. The Exari ship exploded in a ball of fire, and another followed, and another. The Leviathan's crew couldn't help but watch in shock as their first wave of drones tore through the Exari forces one by one. The Exari fighters fell like leaves in the wind, their sleek forms consumed by fire. "It's working, Captain!" Ruiz barked, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're falling!" Elena didn't smile. Not yet. She knew the Exari weren't fools. They had seen countless worlds fall beneath their might. This was just the beginning. "Don't get cocky," she warned. "Target the mothership's lower decks. That's where their hangar bays are. Cut off their reinforcements." The Leviathan's massive rail cannons shifted into position. The ship's main guns hummed with an energy that filled the air with a low, resonating sound. Elena braced herself as the cannons unleashed their first volley. Hyperdense slugs shot forward at a fraction of the speed of light, striking the underside of the Exari mothership like sledgehammers against glass. The impact reverberated through the Leviathan, rattling the crew to their bones. The Exari mothership responded. Its shields flared to life, shimmering gold and twisting as they absorbed the force of the blasts. But they didn't break. "Minimal damage," Ruiz muttered grimly. Elena's gaze never wavered from the massive enemy ship. They were hitting it with everything they had, but the Exari's technology was ancient, far older than humanity's. The shields held strong, and the ship barely seemed to flinch. A bright lance of energy lashed out from the Exari mothership's underside, slicing across the sky. The beam struck one of the Leviathan's drones, vaporizing it instantly. The bridge crew held their breath as the mothership fired again. And again. "They're targeting our defense grid," Ruiz shouted. "Adjust patterns now." The Leviathan's drones broke formation, weaving and darting through the air in a desperate attempt to confuse the Exari's targeting systems. For a moment, it seemed to work. The drones scattered like sparks in the wind, evading the deadly beams as they streaked past, harmless. But Elena could feel it. The Exari weren't panicking. They were adapting. Fast. "We can't win a head-on fight," Ruiz said quietly, the reality sinking in. Elena clenched her teeth. She knew. She knew this wasn't a battle they were going to win in the traditional sense. They were here to survive, here to make a stand, to show the galaxy that humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. "We're not here to win," she said softly. "We're here to remind them who we are." She turned to the crew, her resolve hardening. "Prepare to ram the mothership. Full speed ahead." Ruiz's eyes widened. "Captain, are you—" "I'm serious," Elena cut him off. "We're going through them." Elena's words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, everything on the bridge seemed to freeze. The crew knew what she was asking them to do. It wasn't just a bold maneuver. It wasn't just reckless. It was a desperate gamble. The Leviathan was humanity's last hope. And now Captain Elena Vance was asking it to take everything they had, every ounce of strength and power, and sacrifice it all in one brutal, unstoppable charge. The bridge hummed with the sound of the Leviathan's engines as they adjusted, pushing the ship into a trajectory that would take it straight into the heart of the Exari mothership. Every officer knew that they had no other choice. They were being torn apart by waves of fire, by alien technology that far surpassed their own. The Leviathan wasn't a vessel built to outrun the Exari's speed. It was built to endure. And now it would endure by slamming headfirst into the enemy ship with all the force it could muster. "Course plotted," Lieutenant Foster's voice cracked over the comms. "Engines are pushing at 120%. She'll make the jump, Captain. Just pray we don't break apart before impact." The ship groaned under the strain. Sparks danced across the bridge, and Elena could feel the vibrations through her boots, through her very bones. They were pushing the Leviathan beyond its limits, beyond what anyone had thought possible. The ship's systems, already damaged from the Exari's previous attacks, were beginning to whine, to flicker. But there was no time to fix them. They were committed. "Brace for impact," Elena commanded, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it. She could feel the weight of their last chance pressing on her shoulders. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. She could hear the faint sound of alarms going off in the distance, warnings flashing across every corner of the ship. The hull would buckle, the shields would collapse, and still the Leviathan would push forward, cutting through the Exari ship like a battering ram. The tension was palpable. On the bridge, officers stared at their consoles, eyes wide, watching the readouts as the distance to the Exari mothership closed with terrifying speed. The Leviathan's forward cannons fired in bursts of desperation, sending slugs and missiles toward the Exari ship. But it was clear that they weren't enough. The mothership's shields held firm. The Exari fighters, though weakened by the initial drone swarm, were regrouping, now accelerating toward the Leviathan with fresh fury. It was only a matter of time before they reached the human ship. Elena's knuckles turned white as she gripped the armrest of her command chair. She could feel the ship shudder beneath her, feel every warning and malfunction and fractured system rattle her nerves. Still, she remained steadfast. "Hold steady," she said through gritted teeth, barely able to hear her own words over the cacophony of alarms. 20 seconds, Ruiz shouted from the weapons console, his voice tight with urgency. "They're targeting our reactor core. They know what we're doing." "Doesn't matter," Elena replied, her voice sharper now as the weight of the situation bore down on her. "We're going through them, not around them." The crew exchanged glances, their eyes filled with the quiet acceptance of what was to come. There were no more words, no more plans. This was it. This was the moment they had prepared for, whether they were ready or not. Humanity was staring down the barrel of its extinction, and all they had left was this desperate charge. The HFY mothership loomed larger now, its surface flashing with bursts of light as its weapon systems began to charge. The air crackled with tension. Fighters zoomed in, their weapons blazing, but the Leviathan was already too close. Elena could feel the heat from the enemy blasts as they rocked the Leviathan's hull. She winced as a sudden explosion from the side sent a wave of fire through the bridge, causing several officers to fall to the ground. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and for a moment the entire ship seemed to lurch, as though it might fall apart under the strain. "Elena, we need to pull back," Ruiz said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't take much more of this." "We're not pulling back, Commander," Elena snapped. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "We finish this. Now." And with that, the decision was made. The Leviathan surged forward again, its engines howling as they fought to hold together, pushing the ship faster, harder. Ruiz's face turned ashen, but he didn't argue. There was no time left for doubts. The ship was already on its collision course. "Impact in 10 seconds, Foster called out from the engineering console. "Hull integrity at 15%. Reactors going critical." "Target the HFY's hangar bay," Elena shouted. She had one shot at this. If they didn't break through the HFY's defense systems now, they never would. The Leviathan's forward cannons fired in quick succession, their massive projectiles ripping through the void, aimed straight for the HFY mothership's underbelly. The shots struck the ship's lower decks, their force enough to send shockwaves through the hull. But again, the HFY shields absorbed the blows with only minimal damage. It wasn't enough to stop the Leviathan's charge. Elena watched, unmoving, as the distance closed to nothing. 5 seconds. The sound of the approaching HFY energy weapons hum filled the air, a low and menacing rumble as it powered up. Elena's heart raced, and yet she felt an eerie calm settle over her. They were so close now. Close enough that she could see the minute shifts in the HFY ship's hull, the fine details of its structure, the intricate alien designs that adorned its surface. It was a thing of ancient power, a ship designed to conquer and destroy. But the Leviathan wasn't here to conquer. It wasn't here to destroy for the sake of power. It was here to survive. Collision in 3 seconds. The HFY mothership unleashed its main cannon, a brilliant, blinding beam of energy that lit up the entire battlefield, streaking through space like a comet of destruction. The Leviathan took the full brunt of the blast head-on, its shields flickering and collapsing under the intense pressure. The ship's metal frame groaned, and the entire vessel shook violently, throwing Elena and the crew to the floor. A wave of heat engulfed the bridge, and the lights flickered. But still, the Leviathan did not slow. "Hold on!" Elena screamed as the ship rocked beneath her. "Brace!" 2 seconds, Ruiz shouted, his voice barely audible above the roar of the engines. And then, in a final act of defiance, the Leviathan plowed straight into the HFY mothership, its massive frame slamming into the alien vessel with an earth-shattering force. The impact was so violent that the very fabric of space seemed to ripple in the wake of the collision. The sound of the ship's hull tearing through the HFY's defenses was deafening. The Leviathan carved through the outer layers of the mothership's armor, sending sparks and debris flying in every direction. The massive alien vessel shuddered as the human warship tore through its heart, breaking through the outer decks, punching through the layers of advanced shielding that had once seemed invincible. And then, for a moment, there was silence. The Leviathan had breached the HFY mothership. But this was only the beginning. The moment the Leviathan made contact with the HFY mothership, time seemed to stretch. The ship's body groaned under the strain, every inch of its hull feeling the pressure of the collision. Elena's ears rang with the deafening sound of metal grinding against metal, the force of the impact pushing the crew back in their seats. For a moment, it felt as though the entire universe held its breath. But then, the Leviathan surged forward, carving a bloody path through the Exari's outer layers. The enemy ship's once pristine surface buckled, cracked, and exploded as the human warship tore through its defenses like a bullet through glass. The sound of shrieking metal filled the air, and Elena's grip on the armrest tightened, her knuckles white with the effort of holding on. She could feel the ship rattling beneath her, could feel the system's warnings flashing across the bridge. "Shields down to 10%!" Lieutenant Foster shouted from the engineering console, his voice tinged with panic. "Hull integrity at 5%. We can't take much more of this." "Keep pushing!" Elena barked, her voice unwavering. "We break through. We will break through." The Exari mothership seemed to fight back, its massive hull shifting in response, as though the ship itself were alive, trying to seal the wounds the Leviathan had inflicted. But it was no use. The Leviathan's massive frame continued to tear through the Exari ship's outer layers, punching deeper and deeper into its interior. Sparks erupted from the ruptured hulls of the alien vessel, and a series of explosions rippled through its structure, igniting fires in the belly of the ship. "Captain, we've reached the inner decks!" Ruiz shouted over the noise, his voice filled with urgency. "We're inside their core." "Keep moving," Elena snapped. "We're not stopping now. We push until we hit their control nexus." The bridge was a chaotic mess of sparks, alarms, and orders being shouted across the room. The crew scrambled to keep the Leviathan functioning, each member of the team doing their part to keep the ship alive. Yet, despite the damage, despite the growing number of warnings flashing across the console, there was something in the air that drove them forward. A shared understanding that this was humanity's last chance. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "We've breached their main reactor room," Lieutenant Foster called out. His voice was filled with awe and disbelief. "The core's volatile, but it's not fully exposed yet. If we can keep pushing forward, we can get to their command center." "We need to disable their weapon systems," Elena replied, her eyes locked on the tactical display. "We can't afford to let them fight back. Ruiz, get the targeting data for the reactor. We'll disable the rest of their systems once we've taken their defenses out." The crew moved with a sense of purpose now, driven by a singular goal: to take down the Exari mothership from the inside. The battle had shifted from a fight for survival to a mission of retaliation, a fight not just to defend Earth, but to show the galaxy that humanity would not go down without a brutal, bloody fight. Ruiz worked quickly, his fingers flying over the weapons console, tracking the movements of the enemy forces. The Exari were not just passive victims. They were responding, adapting, countering with their own forms of retaliation. Their defense systems, though damaged, were beginning to fight back. The ship seemed to pulse with an eerie energy as its internal systems struggled to regain control, attempting to fight back against the human assault. "Targeting data is coming in," Ruiz said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "The main reactor's vulnerable, but it's heavily guarded. If we take it out, their entire defense grid will collapse. We need to clear the path." Elena nodded, her mind working quickly as she processed the information. "Then we move fast. Ruiz, get our forces prepped for boarding. Foster, we're counting on you to keep the systems online long enough for us to reach the reactor." The crew scrambled to carry out their orders. The walls of the Leviathan shook with each impact from the Exari's counterattacks, but it held firm, its sturdy frame barely flinching as it continued to carve through the mothership's innards. Elena stood, her gaze fixed ahead, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts with a sharp focus. 5 minutes to target," Ruiz reported. "We're close, but the Exari are regrouping. They've deployed additional forces to intercept us. They're not getting in our way, Elena replied, her voice low, her expression hardening. We're taking the fight to them, no more waiting. The crew prepared for the next phase. Boarding teams suited up in armored gear, their rifles slung over their backs, their faces grim with determination. There was no hesitation in their movements, no fear. They were soldiers, and they had a job to do. They moved quickly, gathering in the hangar bay, where the deployment doors hissed open. The eerie silence of the HFY mothership loomed around them, its dark corridors stretching out like a labyrinth. Remember, we're here to disable their core, take out their command center, Elena reminded the team over the comms. No heroics, just efficiency. We'll clear a path for the engineers and make sure nothing stops us. Let's move. The soldiers moved swiftly, their boots echoing in the empty hallways as they made their way through the alien ship. The eerie glow of the HFY's bioluminescent walls cast long shadows, and the metallic scent of the ship filled the air. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a strange, almost living energy. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, an alien structure that felt less like a machine and more like a creature. Watch your corners, Elena instructed, her voice calm but firm. Stay tight. Move like shadows. The sound of clanging metal filled the corridors as the first HFY soldiers appeared. They were tall, their skin covered in sleek, organic armor that shimmered with iridescence. Their eyes burned with cold, alien fire, and they moved with unnatural grace, their bodies contorting as they dodged the human soldiers' shots. They were fast, faster than anything humanity had faced before. But the humans had their own way of fighting. Their strength wasn't in speed or size. It was in resilience. The human soldiers didn't hesitate. They fought dirty, using grenades and explosive charges to break apart the sleek HFY warriors. They fired in short, controlled bursts, never wasting a round, always keeping their focus on the target. It wasn't about winning. It was about surviving long enough to reach their goal. Elena moved at the front of the squad, her rifle raised, her eyes scanning the strange corridors. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the halls, and the stench of burning alien flesh filled the air. The HFY fought back viciously, but the humans had something they didn't. A will to survive that couldn't be matched. Keep pushing, Elena shouted as they reached a narrow hallway leading deeper into the ship. The path ahead was cluttered with debris from the initial breach, and the remnants of the HFY defenses were still active, firing on the human soldiers. We're almost there. The path was clear for now, but the HFY weren't going to give up easily. Elena could feel the tension in the air, feel the battle shifting with each step they took deeper into the ship. Every hallway was a gauntlet, and every corner could bring them face to face with death. But they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. They would fight, bleed, and die if necessary. But they would take the HFY with them. The crew of the Leviathan pressed on through the labyrinthine corridors of the HFY mothership, each step forward feeling like a race against time. Elena could feel the tension mounting in the air as they made their way deeper into the alien ship. Every corner they turned, every narrow passageway they navigated, seemed to hold new dangers, but they kept moving. There was no room for fear. There was only the objective, the mission: destroy the HFY's core, take down their command center, and cripple their ability to retaliate. The sound of battle echoed through the ship's walls, mingling with the unnatural hum of the HFY's technology. The ship felt alive, almost sentient. Its walls pulsated with a strange bioluminescent glow, casting eerie shadows on the metallic surfaces. The corridors seemed to shift with each step, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. It was as if the ship itself was fighting them, trying to repel the intruders. But humanity had learned how to fight. And right now, there was no turning back. 20 meters to the reactor room, Ruiz called over the comms, his voice steady but laced with tension. We've got more Exari soldiers ahead, but they're not as numerous as they were earlier. Elena nodded, eyes scanning the hallway ahead. There was a heavy metallic thud as an Exari foot soldier dropped from the ceiling above, landing with unnatural grace. Its alien form was sleek and deadly, but its skin shimmered in the dim light, its organic armor seeming to pulse with an eerie, otherworldly energy. The creature's eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence as it raised its weapon, a bone-crafted cannon that fired bursts of green energy. But the human soldiers were ready. The moment the Exari soldier moved to attack, a barrage of fire tore through the air. The soldier was hit before it could even react, its body crumpling under the sheer weight of the human assault. But there was no time to relish the victory. The next wave was already coming. "We need to keep moving!" Elena barked, her voice a harsh command. "The longer we stay here, the more time they have to regroup." The squad moved swiftly, their boots pounding against the cold metal floor, their weapons at the ready. They turned another corner, and this time, the Exari resistance was stronger. Several more soldiers appeared from the shadows, their glowing eyes fixated on the human intruders. This time, they weren't alone. The corridor ahead was blocked by a massive Exari war form, a hulking beast that towered above them. It was unlike anything the crew had encountered before. Covered in thick, writhing armor, it had multiple limbs armed with sharp, bone-like blades that seemed to pulse with energy. Its eyes glowed a bright, icy blue, and its massive body thrummed with power. Elena froze for a moment, assessing the situation. The warform was a terrifying sight, but it wasn't invincible, not if they fought smart. "We can't take that thing head-on," Ruiz said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get around it." Elena's mind raced. She knew they didn't have the luxury of time to think about evasion. The Exari weren't going to let them pass, not now, not ever. They had to take the beast down. "Engage at will," Elena ordered, her voice cold and decisive. "We fight through it. No retreat." The squad reacted instantly. The Exari warform lunged at them with a guttural roar, its multiple limbs slicing through the air with a terrifying speed. Elena ducked just in time to avoid one of the bladed limbs that swiped through the space where her head had been moments before. She fired a burst of rounds at the creature's torso, but the bullets seemed to ricochet off its thick, armored hide. "Target the joints!" Elena shouted. "Aim for the gaps in its armor!" The human soldiers fired in unison, their shots hitting the warform's legs and the spaces between its armor plates. The creature roared in fury as its armored body jerked and twisted, trying to swat away the human soldiers with brutal force. The air filled with the smell of burning metal as the Exari warform retaliated, swinging its massive claws down on the human forces. The soldiers dodged, but not all of them were quick enough. One of the soldiers was struck, his body slamming against the wall with a sickening crunch. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she watched him fall to the ground, blood pouring from his wound. "No time for mourning," she muttered under her breath. "We need to end this." She charged forward, her rifle raised, and fired a precise shot into the creature's exposed joint. The warform stumbled, its knee buckling under the force of the impact. It roared in pain, its attention momentarily diverted. Elena seized the opportunity and moved in, her rifle still firing at the warform's weak spots. The squad followed her lead, focusing their fire on the vulnerable points in the warform's armor. The battle raged on, and the Leviathan's crew fought with every ounce of their strength. The Exari warform was a formidable opponent, but it wasn't unbeatable. The human soldiers were quick, focused, and ruthless, and above all, they were driven by one unshakable truth. They weren't going to let their world fall. "Keep firing," Elena ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos of the fight. "We take this thing down, or we don't leave this ship." The soldiers responded with a roar of defiance, their guns blazing. The warform staggered, its massive body swaying as it took hit after hit. Finally, with a deafening shriek, the warform collapsed, its armored limbs giving way as it fell to the floor with a resounding crash. The crew took a moment to catch their breath, their chests heaving, their adrenaline still pumping. But there was no time to waste. Elena turned, her eyes scanning the hallway ahead. They had reached the reactor room. The final objective was within reach. "Move up!" Elena barked. "Get to the reactor room, we've got no time to lose." The soldiers pushed forward, their weapons at the ready. The hallway stretched before them, its walls lined with strange organic conduits and shimmering energy fields. The Ixari defenses were still active, but they were weakening. The human assault was relentless. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the mothership. As they reached the reactor room door, Elena's hand hovered over the control panel, her breath catching in her throat. The mission was almost complete, but she knew that this was the point of no return. Once they entered the reactor room, there would be no turning back. The crew would either succeed or die trying. "Ready?" Elena asked, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what was about to happen. The soldiers nodded, their faces set in grim determination. "Let's finish this." Elena pressed the button, and the doors to the reactor room slid open with a loud hiss. What they saw inside took their breath away. The Ixari reactor was like nothing they had ever seen. Its core glowed with a strange, pulsating light, and the walls of the room seemed to hum with energy. It was a living thing, a heart of fire and power that fueled the mothership. But it was vulnerable. The core's defensive mechanisms had been damaged in the initial assault. It was only a matter of time before they could strike the fatal blow. "Take out the core!" Elena shouted. "Now!" The soldiers rushed forward, their weapons locked on the exposed reactor. But as they neared, something shifted in the room. The Ixari weren't finished yet. The Ixari weren't finished yet. The air in the reactor room shifted, growing thicker, heavier, as though the ship itself was responding to the presence of the intruders. Elena's heart raced as she saw the room's glowing core pulse, with an even brighter, more erratic light. The walls around them started to tremble, and a deep rumbling sound echoed from the very foundations of the ship. The Ixari had one final trick up their sleeve. "Get back!" Elena shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Before the team could react, massive doors on either side of the room slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire space. The entire room sealed, trapping them inside. The reactor core, which had been humming quietly in the background, now began to pulse erratically, sending out waves of energy that distorted the air around them. Elena's mind raced. This was no ordinary weapon. They had triggered something far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. "The reactor is going critical!" Lieutenant Foster yelled, his voice barely audible over the rising cacophony. "It's going to explode in less than 5 minutes. If we don't stop it, this entire ship is going to tear itself apart." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The Ixari hadn't just been fighting to defend their ship. They'd been prepared for their own destruction. They had rigged the ship to self-destruct if it was breached, turning their mothership into a weapon of last resort. The countdown was already beginning. The crew was locked inside, and there was no way to disable the reactor in time. "Ruiz! Find a way out!" Elena barked. Her mind raced, but she knew they had no time to waste. They had to get out, and fast. The soldiers scrambled, trying to open the sealed doors, but nothing was working. The energy field around them was too powerful. The reactor's core had already begun to overload. They could hear the low hum turning into a violent roar. It was as if the entire ship was shaking from the inside out. Then, just as all seemed lost, Ruiz's voice rang out, full of surprise and disbelief. "Captain, the ship's biolink system, it's alive. The core is self-regenerating. It's trying to repair itself. We can't destroy it manually." Elena's eyes widened. The Exari had truly made their ship a living, breathing thing. But even if they couldn't destroy it from within, there was still one thing left they could do. She looked at her team, their faces filled with exhaustion and determination. Some were still bleeding from previous encounters with the Exari forces. The last remnants of their strength were fading. But in Elena's eyes burned a fire that hadn't died, not once during this hellish ordeal. "We're going to do the one thing the Exari didn't expect," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "We'll destroy them from the inside out." Her plan wasn't to defeat the Exari directly. The ship was going to destroy itself. There was no stopping that now. But what if they could carry out one final act of defiance? What if they could leave behind a message to the galaxy? A final strike that would echo for millennia. "Elena, what are you thinking?" Ruiz asked, his face a mixture of disbelief and understanding. "Overclock the reactor," Elena said, her eyes meeting his. "If we can't disable it, we'll force the chain reaction. We'll set it off ourselves." The room seemed to grow colder at her words. They were asking for the impossible. Overloading a reactor wasn't something anyone had attempted before, but they had no choice. They had no way out. This was humanity's last stand. "Prepare for full overload," Elena ordered. "We're going to burn them into the stars." Foster's fingers flew across the controls, and the ship groaned in protest as systems were forced to their absolute limits. The crew did their best to fortify their position, knowing that they wouldn't survive this. They could only hope their final strike would be enough. Elena looked at each of her soldiers. Their faces were tired, smeared with grime, blood, and the memories of the battle. They had survived so much, fought so hard. But this was the end, and it would be their legacy. "Ready, Captain," Foster called out, his voice unsteady but determined. "Everyone, to the escape pods," Elena ordered, her eyes never leaving the reactor. They had to make it out, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Even if they couldn't escape in time, their mission had to succeed. The Exari had thought Earth weak, thought humanity would kneel before them. Instead, they had witnessed something truly terrifying. A people willing to sacrifice everything, to fight until the very end, to ensure that their world would never be forgotten. The final countdown to the reactor's critical overload began. The countdown lights blinked rapidly, signaling that they had mere seconds left. The crew scrambled, heading toward the nearest escape pods. But Elena remained at her post, her hand gripping the chair. She could feel the tremors as the ship's systems overloaded, as the massive engines fought to hold together, as the Exari ship struggled against its inevitable demise. "Elena," Ruiz said urgently, his hand on her shoulder. "We need to go now." But Elena didn't move. She couldn't move. She had made her choice. Her soldiers would escape, but she would stay. The battle had always been about more than just survival. It had been about showing the galaxy what humanity was capable of. She pressed a final button on the console, and then everything went white. The Exari mothership, once a symbol of ancient power, was consumed in an explosion so violent that the very stars seemed to tremble. The shockwave tore through the ship, ripping it apart from the inside out. The Leviathan's engines roared as it was caught in the blast, the ship's body shredded by the cataclysmic energy. But it didn't matter. The mission was complete. The Exari had underestimated Earth. and humanity had delivered its final message to the galaxy. Earth would not be forgotten. And somewhere, among the stars, the wreckage of the Leviathan drifted, an eternal reminder of humanity's last stand.